Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It's Wednesday, February 19th. Derek and Riper here with Eno Saris. On this episode, we continue the team preview series in the American League Central. We are now heading into our fourth team preview episode, so two more to go next week. If you missed any of them so far, check them out. The NL Central's the previous episode in the feed. We have both of the AL West and NL West in the feed from last week. Tons of ground to cover, We're not going to have pleasantries. We're just going to go. The only pleasantry I'm going to offer is that the Discord is open. You can join with the link in the show description. We've got team channels, strategy channels, everything you could want all in one place. So come hang out with us and some other Rates and Barrels listeners. We begin, as we do on every one of these team previews, at the top of the AL Central from last year with the Cleveland Guardians. And yet again, we are asking the same kind of question. Can they once again defeat projected decline? I don't love what they did with the group of hitters this year by trading Josh Naylor in a deal that brought Slade Cecconi back to Cleveland and then signing Carlos Santana. It just feels extra risky because Naylor was pretty clearly their second best hitter behind Jose Ramirez last year. And even though they only had one more year before he was going to be a free agent, I feel like replacing Josh Naylor with a soon-to-be 39-year-old might backfire for a team that still needs to find ways to score more runs.
Yeah, I recently got offered Carlos Santana in a dynasty league and just laughed. I mean, no matter what his projections are, and they're mediocre, I wouldn't even believe them. I mean, this is just the point of a career where one little thing, one little injury, one slump to begin the season, and your career's over. I guess what they believe in Cleveland is that they are set at that position. If that happens, Kyle Manzardo just takes over. His projections are nicer. His projections, if they are wrong in the good way, and he breaks out at 24. He's put together in the minors everything you'd want to see from a guy in terms of not striking out, walking, and hitting for power. In the major leagues, it hasn't been as impressive for Kyle, but when we had him on the pod, I felt like he was pretty cerebral, and he's going to do his best to kind of patch these things. I do think that he admitted himself that he might have a little bit of a hole at the top of the swing, and so maybe those minor league strikeout rates are deceptive to an extent, and he's going to be more 23, 24% this coming year. That's still going to afford him the chance to hit 250 with 20 homers as projected, and I think the upside to kind of do 25, 30.
Yeah, one thing we've started to do with each of these team previews is discuss who the core five. The rule of five is essentially that if you have a 13 player position player group, right? 4 guys on the bench, 9 starters. You can mix and match 4 of those spots. 5 guys have to be regulars or near everyday players. Okay, so Jose Ramirez, of course, is one of those 5. Stephen Kwan is another one. I assume they look at Carlos Santana in that light. And Lane Thomas, by projections, is in that group. So
and Rocchio is your kind of Turang of this group, where he's like in for the glove.
Yeah, in there for his defensive ability, and maybe I think the comp I made last year was to Geraldo Perdomo, where it's just like, well, hey, look, he's going to play a lot, and maybe he'll steal 15 or 20 bags and occasionally run into some homers, and I don't know, 230, 294, 326 slash line. That doesn't really play anywhere. That's an NL only in-game guy.
I wanted to find something exciting to say about him, and I was going to make that Perdomo comp because the year you made that, Perdomo was like one of his best years. He was actually, kind of useful in a lot of leagues that year. And since we've also seen the downside of Perdomo. So I was looking at Rocchio's hard hit chart, and his rolling hard hit percentage at the end of the season was 5%.
5%.
I don't think I've ever seen a chart that low. So, yeah, I don't have too much hope for him breaking out or anything. I think he's a volume play. I don't know that their other shortstops are ready. They always seem to have, they're kind of a shortstop factory, but none has been as good as Lindor, and I don't think Rocchio is anywhere in that conversation. So, just a kind of a warm body approach. But, I think Carlos Santana is a soft entry into this rule of 5, just because of the reasons I said earlier. So, Kyle Manzardo, 6th in projected plate appearances, could easily join the 5, I think. I do think most of the other players behind them are flawed or role players or catchers. John Quincy Noel is fun because he hits the ball really hard, but he also has a 28% strikeout rate and hasn't been the type of player that the Guardians have given a lot of playing time to in the past since Franmil Reyes. So maybe he can be a Franmil Reyes, that he could be an outside shot to join the 5. And then I think Juan Brito is just interesting because second base is an open position until Travis Bazzana comes up at least. Juan Brito is going to get the first shot. And so I thought I'd look at, some of the comps for him. And I just looked at 24 and under. Brito is 23 now, was 22 so he's going to be better than a lot of these comps because he was younger than them. But this is high walk rate, low strikeout rate, non-zero power, and non-zero speed. And you have some boring older guys like Ji-Wan Bae is on here. Caleb Durbin's on here. Addison Barger, Ryan Bliss, Tristan Peters. These are lower ceiling guys that might be close to the big leagues and were interesting. Some are playing in the big leagues this coming season for sure. As you get younger, you get a little bit more interesting. Nick York is on here at 22. Jackson Holiday at 20. Nacho Alvarez Jr. at 21. Juan Brito at 22 last year. As you can see, it's not, Tyler Black is on here at 23. It's not a list of the best prospects in baseball. Maybe it's because it's AAA and not AA. They're not super young. The average age is 22.8 on this list. But the average slash line for these group of comps for Juan Brito is 307, 418 on base percentage, 495 slugging, and a 141 WRC plus. Given that these guys are all younger than either age appropriate or younger, it's a good list of players. I don't know why it's not producing top prospects. Maybe it's because this isn't the sort of top end power guys. I took the top end power guys off of this. Manzardo was a comp on this, except he had too much power, and I think he had much to do with what Juan Brito was doing. So, and I think the other thing that we don't have here is we don't have the batted ball data. I didn't use that as part of the comp. And so we don't know if those guys get to their power by their legs or by their bat. And that seems to be important for getting to the big leagues, especially if you're looking at a group of players who steal bases. So I think Brito is interesting from a plate skill standpoint, but I don't necessarily have him circled as someone I need as a sleeper for this year in drafts. Like, what do you think? Even if he got the job and played all year, I think his upside is like 250, 12, 15.
Yeah, a deeper league, decent middle infielder, but not necessarily someone who's cracking a 10 or a 12 team fantasy league. That's probably the year one sort of expectation for Brito. And it's funny, even Angel Martinez, a teammate in the organization, is right there on that list as a comp too. It just seems like this is the type of player that either by trade or even just by international free agency, draft, and development, the Guardians always have guys like this. And every once in a while they pop.
Kind of boring, and the max EV is boring, and the bat speed might be boring.
Do wonder too how tricky it is when we're talking about the switch hitting middle infielders, which also it's another trait that a lot of the Guardians options have. Mm-hmm. Maybe you've got more power from the left side than the right side, and you're a little more slappy from one side, so that takes your overall hard hit rate and drags it down and makes it look less interesting. There's a lot of different ways that being a switch hitter could make this even more complicated, but I agree with your overall assessment of Brito. I think he's interesting enough to be a big leaguer. It might be more of a soft regular than something that's going to be great for us in the long run.
There is a note from Mandy Bell of MLB.com that says the Guardians, quote, continue to express their extreme excitement on quote end at getting a look at Brito at second base this spring. So, I could see a draft and hold like third second baseman might be a good use for him.
Let's shift the focus over to the pitching side, where there were a few changes. I mentioned Slade Cecconi coming back in the Josh Naylor trade. They acquired Luis Ortiz from the Pirates. John Means recently was signed, and a couple additions in the bullpen with Paul Sewald and Jake Junis entering the fray. So a lot of changes here, and even the return to health of Gavin Williams after an arm injury slowed him down, a weightlifting accident that turned into a pretty significant problem for him in 2024. He's projected to be a much larger part of the equation this year. This is where Cleveland continues to exceed expectations most years, right? They find enough pitching to be better than expected. They get just enough secondary support around Jose Ramirez, and they do well in the AL Central. It's just sort of the script that's worked so well for them. I know you've liked Luis Ortiz for a long time. A lot of what he did last year from a success standpoint came in the bullpen. What are you expecting from Ortiz moving back into a regular starter's role with the move to Cleveland?
Well, one thing that I really liked about him as a starter was just that he added the cutter. And, once he did that, he was a 3 fastball guy that has a 86 mile an hour kind of power curve type slider. That's the type of slider that you can probably use against both hands. And given 3 fastballs, you always have with 3 fastballs, you always have 2 fastballs you can use against each hand. Let's say you want to avoid sinkers, righty, lefty, then you could gen your cutter 4-seam slider against them. And if you want to avoid, the 4-seam fastball against righties or whatever, then you can be cutter sinker against righties. So he's got always options. I think one of the problems is the change really sort of fell off for him. The cutter at 91 is not necessarily the swing and miss pitch, and that's why you get this low strikeout rate from him. But I tend to believe the lower BABIP that he's had, 265 for his career in 238 innings for Luis Ortiz. Oopsie, that uses Stuff Plus, says he's going to have a 287 BABIP. I think that's going to be part of the key is limiting walks. The cutter really helped him limit walks, and getting just enough strikeouts and limiting damage on balls in play. And I think all of these things make him interesting for me. I don't think he's what Steamer says, a 4.6 ERA guy. For me, Luis Ortiz is like a, Zips 3.99 ERA guy. Oopsie 4.10. He's a usable guy in there. Maybe the whip won't be great because that's what happens a lot of times if you just let balls in play. But I'm interested in him.
Gavin Williams, I mentioned the injury before. I think he's the pitcher I like most relative to draft cost right now in this group. Projections from Oopsie are really aggressive in a good way. A 3.69 ERA, strikeout per inning stuff. If the innings total ends up being low, which I think based on some of his minor league workloads, there's reason to believe he can actually work close to a regular season, like full workload, then Gavin Williams could be a huge value this year. Just a matter of avoiding those nagging injuries. They will eventually get Shane Bieber back into the equation too, which if his stuff comes back post-injury, I think changes a lot about the ceiling of this group, right? If you add Bieber to the mix and he's even a 2 or a 3, it softens the blow.
You're worried about the rug being pulled out from Ben Lively because he throws like 89 and it's deceptive, but it doesn't seem like the magic's going to keep going for him. And you're worried about health for Gavin Williams. And to some extent, Luis Ortiz has collapse percentage too. I have Tristan McKenzie at number 150 in my rankings. I wanted to sneak him in there. The reason I did is not because I love necessarily what he's done on the field. He's out of options. And so he's going to make the team. Bieber's going to be on the IL. Cantillo's going to be in the minors. And Jake Junis is going to be the glue that in case of emergency break glass guy when Tristan McKenzie's starting, or just generally the middle reliever with some length to him, and the spot starter. So Tristan McKenzie, this is your last, I mean, not your last shot, but this is one of your last shots. This is the big deal. So maybe he'll come in with his best velocity and his best command.
We saw this bullpen on full display in October, and it was phenomenal throughout the regular season last year. I think the only question people are going to have is, Will there be a hangover effect of the heavy workloads for the group? Emmanuel Clase, one of the best closers in baseball, we talked about on the reliever preview. Cade Smith had a massive breakout last year. They add Sewald as another veteran. Hunter Gaddis, Tim Herron, lots of quality depth there. Like one of the best and deepest bullpens in the league. But do you expect them to take a step back after their usage last year?
I wanted to look at the heaviest used pitchers from 21 to 23 and see if we saw any of them fall off in 24. Tyler Rogers, number 1. Chris Stratton, number 2. I believe we saw some fall off there. Scott Barlow, number 3. I believe he was hurt last year. Emmanuel Clase, 4. Hector Neris, we definitely saw a stuff reduction from him. Brent Suter throws 89. No one's worried. Kyle Finnegan, Phil Maton, Clay Holmes, and Trevor Steffen. That's the top 10. I wouldn't say that it's super obvious. I can't use 2020, so let's do the 3 years going into 2020. In that time, Yusmeiro Petit, Craig Stammen, Mike Lorenzen, Miguel Castro, Michael Givens. I don't know. It's you don't always get innings because you're the best reliever. And you don't always get hurt because you got a lot of innings. But I tend to think it's a little bit of an issue that Emmanuel Clase is the leader in innings in the last 3 years. I feel like that's a large workload for him, especially given his velo. He's 7 innings free of Tanner Scott. There's not really another closer that has thrown as much as him. Camilo Duvall has thrown 20 fewer innings. Jason Adams is 30 fewer innings. I mean, you know what I mean? Like it's the combination of bulk and velocity that makes me a little bit nervous about Emmanuel Clase this year.
The way they're built, though, if something were to happen, if you were to end up on the IL,
Smith is fire.
They're fine. Their bullpen's still going to be very good.
But your fantasy better with them than without
him. Right. Yeah. You may have a scramble on your hands after using an early pick on Clase if he does, in fact, break down. PECTOA does not love the Guardians. 79.9 is the win total projection. Too hot, too cold, or just right?
I'm just going to go with too cold because of the magic dust. Whatever it is, the magic dust they've got, they're going to sprinkle on the team again. Right. It's not a very scientific answer. But I mean, I guess it's just, maybe our focus, a lot of the projections we look at, like the Bat X and Oopsie and stuff, they focus a lot on bat speed and batted ball velocities, and they seem to be doing pretty well in Cleveland without that same focus.
Yeah, I think you get to a certain point, you do it for a decade and keep doing it with different personnel, you just get the benefit of the doubt. This felt light too. I think it's a team that's just built to be unloved by the projections. That's the way I look at the Cleveland Guardians. I think they're still contenders in that division, even with the puzzling decision to move on from Josh Naylor prior to his walk here. But defensively, they are better with Carlos Santana at first base. Pretty big swing at that position if you're looking for the why'd they do it reason. I think that's at least one of them to consider. And maybe they really like Slade Ciccone too. So we'll see how they use him, but he has options left. As Eno pointed out earlier, Tristan McKenzie among the players that don't. So it may take a little longer for Slade Ciccone to actually break in Cleveland. Let's move on to the Royals. Are we buying the bump up in 2024? One thing that really surprised me, kind of looking back at some things from 2024, was that the Royals finished 86-76. They had a better Pythagorean record by 5 wins. They were 91-71 based on runs scored, runs allowed. And they continue to try to make the roster better. They make that trade with the Reds to bring in Jonathan India. It cost them Brady Singer. Joey Wiemer's there too. We'll see if he ends up with a bench role in the outfield. But they didn't really lose any hitters of great import. You see Garrett Hampson, Paul DeYoung, Tommy Pham, Yuli Gurriel, Adam Frazier, role guys all gone. They added in Carlos Estevez, re-signed Michael Wacha and Michael Lorenzen. So really keeping the band together, adding one pretty high volume player with health to the position player group, and at least the guy that'll get on base a lot, even if we have questions about the power in Jonathan India. So I think the biggest question I have for you when I look at this Royals team is, beyond the India addition, Is there anyone else that you could see getting better? Because part of the story last year was Bobby Witt Jr. ascending to superstar status. Like, you get to the 10 WAR level, there's nowhere else to go. He's not going to give you a season better than what he just did. You're hoping for a repeat, and even that is a tough ask for any player. So it kind of seems like to continue down this path and continue to improve as a club, they need other guys to step up in that supporting cast.
Yeah, I mean, they were 22nd in WRC Plus last year, or maybe it was 20th, but 13th in runs scored, which does underlie something about the park, which is interesting, which is that it can suppress homers, but it does. It is a neutral environment, at least for batters. This has been something that upset Eric Hosmer very greatly to hear. And I do plead guilty. I spent a lot of time looking at the home run park factors. I found those the most interesting and important park factors for pitchers and hitters generally, especially in fantasy. But what Kauffman can do is decrease strikeouts, and that's an interesting thing to think about when you think about MJ Melendez, who's had the strikeout problem while being in Kansas City. You may not be rooting for him to get a chance elsewhere. It may have more strikeouts in it and be worse. Melendez, I just wanted to mention real quick because he has a new swing. He has reduced the toe tap. He's trying to be flatter into the zone early on. He is kind of scoopy. Could that be the reason he breaks out? I'm not waiting anymore. I mean, it's 26 and he has 1,600 plate appearances basically in the major leagues with a 91 WRC plus. I'm going to stop looking at his max EV at this point, and just be like, this is who he is, I guess. And it's not super exciting. But maybe this is the reason he breaks out. I mean, fourth year in the big leagues, 26 years old, new swing. That could be it. But I'm a little bit more excited about Vinny Pasquantino. So I prepared this little slide for you because, early in the season, he was swinging 71.2 miles an hour. Late in the season, 71.8. Early in the season, the swing length was 7.4 feet. Late, it was 7.3. So his swing got shorter and faster. He had an interaction with Tom Tango where he was talking about metrics that we don't have access to, but Tom Tango told him that late in the season, he made contact 3 inches further out in front of the plate than he did early in the season, and that he was 2 inches closer to the plate than he was early in the season, and that these things were both good things. I've seen some analysis that Tom Tango is reading recently that if you want to miss along the barrel, you want to miss closer to the handle rather than closer to the end. And so getting closer to the plate, making contact out in front of the plate where you're likely to have a little more loft in your swing, doing it with more bat speed and a shorter swing, all these things are good. Vinny Pasquantino had a 176 ISO early in the season and a 243 before he got hurt late in the season. And so if Vinny Pasquantino has the upside to have a 243 ISO all season, that will be a major breakout because that is 40 to 70 points higher than any projection system has him. And that would be probably something that looked like a 270, 275 average with 30 homers because he's projected already for as much as 26 homers. So do you want a first baseman with 275 and 30 homers? I do.
I want a first baseman that is further removed from shoulder surgery. He had that freak thumb injury that happened with the collision at first base last year, but a low strikeout rate guy that actually also takes walks and is getting to more power despite the ballpark. Those are all good things. And even if you want to set the expectation to the mid-20s for home runs, I think that's a nice step forward for them and the type of improvement you need probably from a couple other guys as well to get that supporting cast to be more dangerous in a playoff situation as well.
You can see it in the rule of 5 is that the fifth entry is really soft, and it's not a fifth entry that's like, oh, he's our shortstop, so it's okay. The fifth entry is Michael Garcia right now with a 91 WRC plus projection, or MJ Melendez surprisingly with a 99. Are we on oopsie, or is this the bad X?
This should be the bad X. It is the bad X.
Wow. So the Bad X thinks he can push that rock out there. Sisyphus is going to do it this year. So I don't know. Between Melendez, Garcia, and Massey, I do think you have three. I mean, they're all projected for sort of 90-ishes WRC plus. To have one of them break out into 105, 110 territory is, you're not asking too much. They're not old. They're actually all in the peak age range, so they're set up pretty well. I'll just say that I have touted these guys for 2 or 3 years now, and I'm tired of it. Just honestly, I'm tired of it. I'm not going to do it this year. And this will be the year they break out, right?
Well, I did see we got an email from Brandon Funston, one of our fantasy editors, asking for staff sleepers. So if you would like to write up MJ Melendez again, you are free to do it, because I will not do it, sir.
No, I submitted my list and he's not on it.
It's nice that he's making some more adjustments, and it's not impossible, but I'm not going to put that on the site with my name next to it at this point.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's take a look over at the pitching side here. I mean, Seth Lugo was phenomenal last year. Cole Reagans is really the ace in terms of stuff and ceiling. We get that. Michael Wacha pitched really well again last year too, so having him back was really important. I think the common theme, though, with the Royals, I mentioned the Vinny Pasquantino thumb injury. They were generally a pretty healthy team compared to many others in the league last year. So
that's where it can go a little bit more wrong in this rotation, because it's not a deep rotation.
Yeah, they brought back Lorenzen for innings. I imagine Lorenzen's the kind of guy that is your 5 and gets you through the regular season and probably doesn't throw a pitch, at least as a starter in a playoff series. Maybe he's your last reliever in for bulk, depending on who's healthy or something along those lines. I wonder if we're going to find extra value from either Kyle Wright coming off of major shoulder injury, or Chris Bubich, who came back and pitched really well in the bullpen last year. I think getting a little more from the back end would help. It would probably offset an almost certain injury to one of the more important pitchers in this group. It seems very unlikely to me that the top 3 guys, especially given Lugo's age, Reagan's, and Wacha's injury history, that all 3 of those guys give them 30-plus starts again this year.
Yeah, and I think there's a decent amount of sort of chance that the league has now seen Seth Lugo with his 8 pitches, and it's kind of hard for him to be like, now I have 15 pitches.
I don't think if anyone could do it, though, it's him. It's Lugo and Darvish, those 2 guys.
Reagan's lost more velo over the course of the season than anybody else. Somebody did point out that his max was okay. And that he didn't lose as much max as he lost sitting. So maybe it was about, and then also that Cole himself, Nick Pollock was saying that Cole himself talked about lower half mechanics and getting that back. So maybe it was just a little sort of blip in the road. But usually when I see a large number like 1.6 miles an hour lost, it makes me worried. And I don't really like any of their depth starters as people I think are going to break out. Lorenzen's a little bit like Lugo, where he's just got a lot of pitches, and so he can. I think he can have good stretches, but I doubt it'll last all season. Bubich has a small arsenal. I think he's going to lose effectiveness as he loses velo. Kyle Wright, it's major surgery, so I'm kind of searching for other names on this list, even.
Yeah, I think if you go outside of the projections, Noah Cameron is a guy that our friend Jason Collette has written about. He might end up making some starts for this team at some point this year. Alec Marsh is kind of one of those glue guys they could lean on as well. We have been pretty complimentary, too, of what the Royals have been doing with their bullpen over the last year plus, finding different guys via trade. They added Carlos Estevez. I think we talked about Estevez.
Noah Cameron looks kind of interesting. Lefty with 30% strikeout rates, 29-ish.
If I remember the scouting report correctly, it's not overpowering stuff. It's more like really polished. So he might not be a high strikeout rate guy in the big leagues, but he might not be a terribly low strikeout rate guy either.
The Cardinals of the
no, come on now. No, we like this pen. I think the takeaway I had when they brought in Carlos Estevez was he's probably good enough to keep the bulk of the save opportunities. So that's the direction I'm going, even though I like Lucas Erceg more in a vacuum. Hunter Harvey should be healthy. It's kind of a heavy, loaded should all the time when we're talking about Harvey, unfortunately. Daniel Lynch looked good in the pen. Schreiber's good. Yeah, they're a good deep bullpen. So I think this is a pretty well-built roster.
Yeah. Carlos Hernandez, another guy that I've predicted his breakout every year.
You gonna do that again?
This would be the year he takes over a closer. that would take some calamities, I think.
I mean, if Carlos Hernandez is closing games for this Royals team, yeah, things did not go to script for them as an organization. PECTOA has this team as an 81.1 win team, so right at that 500 mark. Is that too hot, too cold, or just right?
I'm going to go with just right. I've been a little down on them in this preview. I don't mean to suggest that I do not like them as a team. And in fact, last year I bold predicted that they would get the wild card, and they did. So I think it's just weird because the reasons I bold predicted them into the wild card are not the reason they got the wild card. I liked some of their young hitters. Their young hitters were mostly boring. So I don't want to pat myself so hard on the back that I say, oh, too cold, and they're going places.
I'm going to say just right as well. I think the main concern I have is depth. I think that's an area where they still lack something. I think they're doing a nice job in that front office as well. Maybe the long-term arrow is still headed in the right direction, but it could be a small setback for the Royals this year. I think it's in part because I am more of a believer in the team that ended up surprisingly getting to the postseason and finishing third in this division, even though they had the same record, I believe, in the regular season as the Royals. It's the Tigers. And I think it's because the Tigers do seem to have that next wave of talent, a few more internal options that you can talk yourself into as still getting better, still reaching their respective ceilings. I think that's where that extra little bit of optimism comes from, even though the overall quality of these teams at last snapshot was very similar. So you look at this Tigers team, they were the winners of the Gleyber Torres sweepstakes, not exactly the outcome Gleyber Torres was probably hoping for when he knew he's going to be a free agent going into the winter, but an opportunity to...
Especially not with that swing. He's a righty that's going to try and go to the deepest part of one of the deeper parks.
Yeah, it's a tough place to have a pillow deal as a hitter, but he also projects to be their highest volume guy. And this is a great rule of 5 team because Scott Harris has, I think, constructed the roster kind of similar to what you see in San Francisco, but he's got a better infusion of young talent to work with. So you can look at all the pieces and you can kind of say, okay,
he's a rule of 5 stymier is who he is.
He likes to break that rule,
he does
but
not like the rule of 5.
Let's just try to find the 5 here. So Gleyber Torres, okay, everyday guy. Riley Green, everyday guy. No pushback on that, right? We agree on those two. Parker Meadows, because of his defense, does he become a rule of 5 guy?
There was a time when Parker Meadows and Colt Keith were trading off and sitting against lefties. And I think one of the difficulties was it was hard for them to get to a rule of 5 if both those guys and Kerry Carpenter and Matt Vierling were all going to be platoon guys, right? Like it's just that, like we say with the rule of 5, the math doesn't work out that way. And I think that Parker Meadows, over the course of the season became more of a guy that played against lefties. And he was so good against righties and just in general that you would project him to be useful against lefties. So in the second half last year, he became more aggressive. He was a little bit less patient. His walk rate went down, but his strikeout rate really went down. His power went through the roof, and he was a much better player when he was aggressive. And he hit 296, 340, 500. That's a 137 WRC plus. Given what you know about players at 130 WRC plus, you'd expect at least a 100, 110 work against lefties. You mentioned the glove. So between what you'd expect him to do against lefties, what he can do with the glove, I think he's the everyday center fielder. I think these projections are low, and I like him. I want to buy at this level of projection. I like that, 229 batting average, 16 homers, 17 stolen bases. That's going to be worth something in your league. But just sort of mentally circle him as someone who doesn't have to hit 229. I mean, look at this strikeout rate, 24% strikeout rate with a 160 ISO, and he's going to hit 229? Like, that math doesn't work out almost. I don't know why they would project him for 279 BABIP. He has legs, he has some power. So I think Parker Meadows is maybe my favorite sleeper on this team, and I'm putting him squarely in the 5.
All right, so that covers 3 spots. Colt Keith making the move over to first base. Does he also get a spot, or do you think he's still going to leak a little bit of time against lefties? Because you can lose a little bit of playing time against lefties. You just can't be a strict platoon guy and make it into that top 5 group.
Yeah, I think it'll be a little bit. His sort of all fields approach seems like something that could lead to smaller platoon splits. His platoon splits aren't that large for his career, so I think he should be okay. I think that what makes this difficult is that Kerry Carpenter is so good, and yet they just won't play him against lefties. So it's hard to put Kerry Carpenter into the 5, but he is really important. So I think Colt Keith is in, I guess. We have Matt Vierling as near the top in plate appearances. I think it has something to do with his versatility. He's right-handed. I don't think he's a pure platoon guy. He's just going to move around, and that's why you'll have guys losing against lefties because they're just going to play Vierling. And so sometimes they'll play Vierling at first. I think they'll reduce how much they play him in center, but they'll play him in the corner outfield. And they'll probably play him a fair amount at third. So if I really had to do this depth chart, I think I would do Keith is in the top 5 and Vierling and Carpenter and yeah, I think they just have 4. I don't know if they have 5. I don't know, man. It's tough. I guess I believe it the way this is. Vierling and Keith are in the 5. Kerry Carpenter is like a super sub, like a great sub. If you're talking about the rule of 5.
But they're second best hitter by WRC plus behind Riley Green, which makes you think that they probably need him to be more in that group than out. Maybe you flip Vierling and Carpenter in terms of plate appearances, and you're talking about 50 to 75 being the difference. It's not that much of a difference, but I think we do, based on the usage so far, understand that Kerry Carpenter is definitely a big side platoon risk, despite just being phenomenal against righties. They also have a lot of young guys that could step into larger roles. Jace Young could be in a larger role than projected. That's a possibility. You could see Trey Sweeney possibly play a larger role. And some of this depends on their willingness to just make Javier Baez a super sub or a clear backup or a small side platoon guy, despite the big contract. So I think that's one of the unknowns. We've wondered all winter if Spencer Torkelson would still be in the organization on opening day. He could be at AAA. Toledo's a possibility for him just to clear out the roster space. I guess that's kind of baked in here as well. So what do you make of some of the younger guys, but specifically Sweeney and Jace Young trying to carve out large roles?
Yeah, Sweeney is really interesting to me because that number looks really light to me. Odds above average had him as a positive +2, but that's not the greatest spot for a shortstop. I mean, just around Willie Adames, Willie Castro, J.P. Crawford, those aren't the best defensive shortstops in the big leagues. And below, if you're significantly below them, you're not really a starting shortstop. That's where it's like David Hamilton and then Javier Baez is at -1. So I actually think that projection of playing time is wrong for Trey Sweeney. I'm going to go with more of a sort of a give at least 100 of Javier Baez's plate appearances to Sweeney and maybe more.
Yeah, I think that's the right sort of adjustment there. And then with Jace Young, if he plays more, I think Matt Vierling would have to play less, even though Vierling can play a lot of spots.
Yeah, I guess if Young emerges, I think they'd be fine with that. I mean, Vierling's projection is okay, 103 WRC plus. It's not something that you need to get in the lineup. I think it's more roster spackle. I think if Young emerges, then if someone else is hurt, then Vierling's now playing second because Glaber's hurt, or you know what I mean. They'll find ways to use him, but if Young emerges, they'd rather Young emerge and be a starting third baseman and just hand him the bat and the glove. You know what I mean? Just hand him that position. I think that's what they would rather have.
Yeah, I think with Vierling, we've seen over the course of his career now a 248, 307, 399 line against righties. That's not a must play against righties. That's a can play against righties, but you're looking for that better option. So I do think this sets up pretty well. The situation that we were worried about with Jace Young back during the position previews was that the Tigers were interested in Alex Bregman, and if Bregman came in, third base was going to be Bregman's, and then Jace Young ends up having to play more of a super sub role or go back to AAA and wait for an injury, and now at least there's a chance for him to just be the primary option at third base, or at least a big side platoon option, with Vierling spelling him and sharing that spot among a few others. Let's take a look at the pitching, and they did it in just the most fascinating way to get into the postseason and then to even try and survive in the postseason. They bring back Jack Flaherty after trading him away at the deadline to get Sweeney and Thyron Lozano. And they are, I think, a challenging team to figure out, but a group of pitchers that we generally like, even behind Skubal. Like the more we look at this group, like Reese Olson came up as a sleeper, I think, in our preview, starting pitching preview a few weeks ago. As long as he's healthy, Skubal, Flaherty, Olson is a nice trio atop the rotation, and they've got plenty of interesting candidates to fill out those other two spots, especially with Jackson Jobe knocking on the door to take one of those spots, because Jackson Jobe has the ceiling of a true ace. It's just a matter of time and avoiding the injuries that have been nagging him through his ascent in that Tiger system.
Yeah, Jobe did suffer a little when it came to the revamp of the Stuff Plus model. And I think it's because, given his arm slot, his four seam really only has, maybe like 2 inches more ride than you'd expect, rather than, a raw look at his movement. Now that we put it in arm slot, we can have something like that. And if a raw look at his movement would say, oh, he has, 17 inches of IVB, like he's pretty good. I think given his arm slot, that's not as impressive. And even 17 inches is not really that impressive. So it's not the best shape in fastballs, but it is 97. The cutter was good. The really weird thing for me about Jackson Jobe, beyond the stuff upgrade, which still has him a 106 Stuff Plus with a really nice cutter and a good changeup. The real problem for me is that he had these great Stuff Plus numbers in the minors, and he did not have, superb strikeout rates. You'd expect someone who has this much hype to have had 30 plus strikeout rates in the minor leagues. That's usually what happens. And Jackson Jobe, in AAA last year, that doesn't count, but let's do AA, 27% for the season last year in the minor leagues, 25.6%. Those are surprisingly lower numbers than you'd expect from a big prospect like this. And that's why the projection systems all have him for 20% strikeout rates or lower. And he didn't really come up and strike everybody out in his small sample. I get it. Opportunity last year. So I don't know that I'm souring on Jobe as my favorite prospect, but I don't know that he necessarily has to break camp with this team, because Kader Montero is a boring but useful high floor guy who's done it before. And so, you're not taking any chances if you put Mize in at 4 and Kader Montero at 5. You're just and you're sending Joe back to the minors. You're managing his playing. He's managing his team control years and giving him the best possibility to land on his feet. But if Jobe does shove all spring, and the spring stuff numbers are great, and he's starting to get strikeouts, if he's striking people out this spring, I will slowly have an up arrow on him.
Yeah, the other factor here is that Alex Cobb is out a month with hip inflammation. That became a problem once he was ramping up in his offseason throwing program. So we'll see if Cobb's able to shake that off.
Surgeries on both hips, so it's not, he didn't have great hips.
Yeah, it might just be depth for later.
He explained that he had like a part of the hip that was like, it's like a genetic, like degenerative, not degenerative, but like a genetic predisposition to injury in there, where he had like a shape that, like where the hip fits in the socket, he had a shape on there that was like always going to lead to injury. And he just knew that it was going to be surgery on both hips eventually. And, it just came to the point where the pain was too much and he had to have the surgery. Yeah.
He's managed to get through a lot of injuries, get back from a ton of rehab to carve out a pretty long career, which is surprising given the stuff that Alex Cobb has dealt with at various points. The
I do want to
bullpen,
say really quickly, I think Mize, is kind of a sleeper here a little bit. I mean, he's pushed the four seam to where it has good shape and good velo. He has a good splitter. It doesn't have the same feel for the splitter as maybe a Kevin Gossman, but he does throw a 90-mile-an-hour breaking ball that if he just develops just enough feel on that pitch, I think he could break out still. I mean, he's a former 1-1. I think he's going to get the chance again.
this is a super deep bullpen in terms of options. We saw AJ Hinch deploy it really effectively throughout the second half in the postseason. Who closes games most often out of this group? I liked Bo Brisky this time last year for really deep leagues, and by the end of the year, it looked like I may have been finally onto something, but not to the degree where I look at him today and say, he's clearly the guy. Do they even have a set closer, or is this going to be an absolute mix and match fest all year?
Well, we don't have the problem that maybe Kenley Jansen comes and just sits at the end for this team. So I like Bo Brisky a little bit better today than I did a couple weeks ago. And in fact, I like Bo Brisky better, not necessarily because his stuff number is great, but we did notice that his stuff number is a lot better in the second half when he's more of a reliever and going in shorter outings. I like him because he throws a four seam. Jason Foley throws a sinker. And I want my closer to throw a four seam. It's a bias, but four seams are less platoon splitty and they are more whiffy. And you just don't really want your closer giving up contact.
So the win total projection for this Tigers team, 78.9. Too hot, too cold, or just right?
Too cold. Yeah. I'm going to anticipate you probably going there too. But I see Bo Brisky, becoming the closer and everyone's sort of falling into place behind him. They've been good at mixing and matching with Job. They have some upside and Mize. They also have Cater Montero and Alex Cobb as floor situations. I think even if Flaherty gets hurt, and there's a decent chance of that because his velo was down really big in the playoffs, and he signed a deal where he gets $10 million basically in 2026, even if he's hurt, which is a weird little aspect to that deal that made me think that maybe he's worried about it. So I think that they do have the depth to overcome some injury there, and they have young players that are ascendant that are kind of interesting.
Yeah, and I keep wondering if there's one more level from Riley Green, too. We wondered for a long time, is the strikeout rate that we see right now really where his true talent strikeout rate lies? My bet is that it's still going to get better. He's going to put even more balls in play. He's going to be an even more complete bat as one of the key hitters for the Tigers here in 2025 and beyond. So I'm on the too cold side of this one as well. We've been agreeing way too much on these throughout the series. We need some healthy disagreements on this show. Maybe we can find one here. Let's talk about these 2025 Twins basically running it back after a really disappointing slide late in 2024. Harrison Bader is in, Ty France now in. They ended up making a small deal to get Diego Cartaya when the Dodgers DFA'd him. Danny Colomb added to the bullpen. The weirdest thing for me about this team right now is that the core they have put together has been through so many injuries that it's got to be one of the lowest projected cores you could imagine. Their rule of five guys are somewhat easy to identify, but you look at how much less they're expected to play than most teams' rule of five group, and you begin to understand the importance of depth for the Twins and probably why they've been such a frustrating team relative to their projections.
I mean, you can see it already with why Willie Castro's in the rule of five, but he's like a utility guy. Like he's their number one plate appearance projected guy. That's a little weird.
No.
And so you said that, and I went and I just took the depth charts at Fangraphs. I took their five best projections in terms of plate appearances and just summed them up. The Marlins have the fewest out of their top five players. I think that reflects the fact that when you're putting that depth chart together, you don't know who's at each spot. And so you have to give chances to guys that aren't maybe going to make the major leagues roster that are going to play later. Like the Marlins roster is in flux. And so that's why they're at the bottom with, 2,667 plate appearances from their top five guys. Minnesota which is a veteran team that should know who's playing where and you know what's going to happen, only has 50 more plate appearances. No, actually 100 more plate appearances from their 5. I mean, look at the other teams that are in here. It's Miami, Minnesota, Chicago White Sox, Tampa Bay Rays, and the Angels. And the Rays, I guess, are like Minnesota, maybe like the Tigers, where they're mixing and matching. But they're also a little bit in an underrated fashion in transition as a team. So you don't know exactly how many chances Junior Caminero or Jonathan Aranda are going to get. So you do have to hedge your bets. These are humans making these depth charts and making guesses. But for Minnesota to be in this mix is a little bit weird, and it has something to do with how injury prone their main guys are.
I think when you look at the WRC plus projections for this team, though, you see that they have done a pretty good job assembling a roster where there are enough good players on it that even when you're missing your best possible players, you're not dead in the water. You actually have some quality behind this group. And the 5 would really be, I mean, Carlos Correa's second in plate appearance projections at 516, Royce Lewis at 501, Byron Buxton at 436. As much as he's able to play as a regular, he's in their group, even though he's not projected for top 5 plate appearances on the roster.
That's not a platoon situation. It's an injury situation.
Right. It's almost like, because Byron Buxton's actually in, Willie Castro, despite being projected for the most plate appearances on this team, really isn't in for me. But even if it's Correa and Lewis and Buxton, who are the other 2 players that are in their core 5 group that's there on an everyday or near everyday basis when they're not on the IL?
Yeah, there's a little bit of a problem here in that Matt Wallner and Trevor Larnach are both guys who hit the ball hard and can get on base. Wallner has top 5 bat speed in the big leagues and really murders the ball. But both of them are really kind of soft on platoons and not great against lefties, or have not been so far. And so, again, if you've got a guy like Trevor Larnach who's projected to be 116 WRC plus, you kind of expect him to be passable against lefties, but it's just not how it works. So some guys have different approaches. Like I said about Colt Keith, like letting it travel seems to work a little bit better against lefties. You see the ball a little bit longer. Guys who maybe are pull happy, trying to hit the snot out of the ball. Kind of a Minnesota Twins way of hitting recently has been kind of pull fly balls, hit it as hard as you can kind of deal. Those guys have, maybe been traditionally more susceptible to platoon splits, and Wallner and Larnach have been platooned. So if you're platooning Wallner and Larnach, you have to have Castro available for Buxton replacement. You have to have Castro and Brooks Lee on call for Royce Lewis replacement. And then Jose Miranda doesn't have a good projection, and so you may only want to play him when the handedness works out. That's how you get into trouble. That's where it seems a little bit sometimes like a little bit less mix and match to profit, and more, oh my God, what are we doing today? Like I feel like being the manager of this team is actually probably harder than most teams.
Yeah, perhaps it is very stressful to be Rocco Baldelli on a day-to-day basis, given some of the uncertainties around this team. I mean, I get the similarities between Wallner and Larnach. It's interesting to see just how much Larnach's K rate projection has improved over time. A 25.9% is fine if you're going to do damage as much as he can. Where I wonder about the solutions comes from guys like Brooks Lee. Edward Julian just looks like a big side platoon at best.
And he spits right into what I'm saying. If you have a 103 projection like like Julian does, then you don't want to play that guy against same-handed.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like a 103 projection suggests that he could be as bad as 85 against lefties, and that's not looking at results. I'm just saying, sort of theoretically, you'd expect that kind of a split.
Yeah. What's the best case scenario from the bottom half group here? Like, who emerges to maybe join that 5? Who solves a problem for this team? Is it Brooks Lee? The projections aren't crazy. I mean, 427 plate appearances with 8 homers, 3 steals, a 242, 290, 356 lines, and 83 WRC plus. Purely by the numbers, you're not looking at Brooks Lee as a solution, but is there anything in the scouting report and the minor league results that makes you think that those projections might be light?
I know they were super excited when he was coming up. They thought he was, in the words of Kevin Millar, hitterish. And I can see what they're saying is that, you know, like he's hit the ball 109 at AAA before. That's not great, but it's not bad. And in 2023, he had a 48% hard hit rate in AAA. That's decent. It's better than what he did last year. So he has the ability to hit the ball hard, makes a lot of contact, takes walks, isn't a pull guy necessarily, can spray it around, doesn't hit the ball 50% in the air or 50% on the ground, so it doesn't have any of those markers. Swing strike rate's pretty good. So I like him, actually. I think that maybe he's the guy that takes off just because he has such a balanced approach. This seems like the kind of player that, and he's a switch hitter, you know? So this is the kind of player that I think will just be just good across the board and give you a guy where you're not worried who the opposing pitcher is. You know, like there's so many guys for other ones where you're like, oh, lefty, oh, right, whatever it is. Like Brooksley, you could maybe just be like, hey, he's a switch hitter. He's gonna be decent. He's got good glove too, right? Like he was the shortstop, so you can plug him in at almost any position. I think he's the new kind of Willie Castro for this team, and I think he might play his way beyond that. Julian, I kind of like too. I don't know why he strikes out so much. If there was a way he could reduce that strikeout rate at all, he could really take off.
I kept looking in the outfield mix. Emmanuel Rodriguez could be a machine for them in center field, take some of the wear and tear off of Buxton. Maybe Buxton plays in a corner when he plays in the outfield eventually and spends a lot of his time at DH again.
But Rodriguez has K issues too, right?
Yeah, with a big OBP though. Like it's been a really tricky profile to try and project the entire time. It's been like, okay, like is it like what's really going to happen here? For a 479 OBP in 37 games at AA last year,
114.6 max EV.
And that was with
something nice in there.
It was only 46 Ks and 167 plate appearances. I think some of the swing and miss that we saw was really early in his career.
But I heard that some of the swing and miss is in zone.
That's the concern then, yeah.
Yeah.
And he's had some injuries of his own.
Swing and strike rates, they're not bad. So the overall swing strike rates. Yeah, I mean, Rodriguez is a divisive figure. Different people have him in different places. Fangraphs put him 20th overall.
It's pretty high, man. It's an impact guy that's going to be probably knocking on the door in the second half. So there's a few different ways they can find supplements to that supporting cast from guys they've already got in the organization. Maybe that's part of how they landed on there. Let's not do anything this offseason. Let's just basically bring this entire roster back and see if we get a different result.
Which of these young guys it takes a step forward?
Pitching's in pretty good shape, at least with the top trio. Pablo Lopez, Bailey Ober, Joe Ryan. I think we like Ryan more than Ober. They got a slightly higher projection for innings on Ober because Ryan finished last year hurt, but he's healthy now, so that bodes pretty well. And I know that David Festa, Zebby Matthews are two guys that actually graded out pretty well in the model. So if they end up usurping Simeon Woods Richardson and Chris Paddock and guys that have been in the 4 and 5 spots a lot for this team, 1 through 5, it could be one of the better rotations in the American League with health.
Yeah, I think if you just say it another way, which is just repeating what you said, basically, but 1 through 7, it's one of the better rotations.
It's a nice group. Yeah.
Once you start counting depth, I think you start to like this a lot better. I don't know why Woods Richardson is projected so high. I think it's mostly because they gave him innings last year, and so it's like, well, they trust him. You know, I don't trust him. I don't trust Chris Paddock either as a starter. You've finally beaten some sense into me on that one. My favorite is Zebby Matthews of the final sort of 4 through 7 guys here. My favorite is Zebby Matthews because he has a nice large arsenal, different kinds of pitches, different ways to succeed. Festa is a little bit of a small arsenal guy that needs to really outstuff his opponents, and I think Zebby has maybe the best ceiling of their depth guys. I'm probably not buying a lot of SWR or Chris Paddock, and Zebby's more of a kind of a draft and hold one of the last few pitchers that I'm going to buy. So it's more circle Zebby and David Festa's names because I do think Simeon Woods Richardson and Chris Paddock get the job to start. Festa and Matthews have options. But circle those names because when they come up, they could be better options than what else is out on your wire.
It's a pretty good bullpen, too. We talked about John Duran as a guy that's still kind of a circle of trust closer for us. Griffin Jacks is phenomenal in the late inning mix. Louis Varland working in relief is a lot more interesting. Brock Stewart has looked good as a reliever when healthy, too. So I like what they've got going in the pen.
We could do an episode on like funky, weird things that people need, but SP eligible relievers.
Yes, Sparps.
Sparps. I don't know if it deserve a whole episode, but let me just give some Sparp love to Louis Varland. I think that he's going to excel in relief. I think he's going to get a couple ticks. The slider is good. He doesn't have to worry about everything else. And I think that they have a place for him in the 8th or 7th, right around Griffin Jacks. Griffin Jacks can't pitch every game, so Louis Varland's got to set up some games. And also, Duran, for me, is the last elite acceptable closer. And, oh, by the way, I did win my game of chicken. In the DC I'm in right now, Duran had a ADP of 68, and my pick was coming up at 68. And I did not jump him, and I took somebody else and waited and got Duran. So I was happy to do that. I'm happy to get Duran. I'm a little bit now worried that I have too many shares, and if he goes down, I'll have too many shares of him. I don't know what people think of diversification, but might as well yo-yo with me.
Hey, I'm glad you won that game of chicken, though. I was encouraging you to wait it out, and I'm glad it worked in your favor.
What did it give me? Because I waited, I was able to pick... Who did I get? I got Pete Alonso.
It's pretty nice.
Yeah, that's better than getting Duran there.
So the PECTOA win total projection for the Twins is 87. I'm afraid we're going to agree again. Do you think that's too hot? Because I think that's too hot.
I'm going to go just right. Because I thought it was going to be lower, and I was going to say hot, too cold.
Okay. So you thought it was going to be like 84 or something?
I was a little surprised by 87. Yeah, 87's like pretty legit. But I think this is a legit team because what you said, we've sort of been underlying our analysis is just that, yes, they have flaws, but their depth has been getting better and better. And depth is underrated sometimes when people project and people think about what's happening this year. They look at, I don't like Simeon Woods-Richards. I don't like, Chris Paddock. Well, if they are bad, then somebody else is going to pitch. And it's nice to go 7 deep in the starting rotation. It's nice to have Brooks Lee, Julian, Juan Miranda, Emmanuel Rodriguez. Like that's a pretty good selection of depth batters that each could break out in their own way and make even 87 look too cold.
All right. Well, I'm staying too hot. I think it's like 83, 84 as it's currently built. I think if they stay in the mix and buy at the trade deadline, which they seem weirdly reluctant to do, then sure, I like what they're doing too. I'm just worried about the way they're built.
If more than one bat or arm breaks out of their young guys, then 87's too low because they've got these quality veterans. I guess if more than one young guy breaks out and more than one veteran is surprisingly healthy,
right?
That's the other flip side of the coin.
For me, the too hot came from the simple fact the Twins were 12-1 against the White Sox last year, and they were 70-79 against everyone else. Like, yeah, they made their layups, but they really, really took advantage of just how bad the White Sox were a year ago, and I'm a little nervous about that. Speaking of the White Sox, let's talk about the 2025 version of this squad.
I'm going to answer the cryon. No.
Yeah, the long-term outlook improving. I think the long-term outlook is improving. I think you can look at this group and
there's only one way to go.
There's only one way to go.
Lost more games than anyone else in history.
And that's probably even a conversation for a completely separate episode. Like, how are they doing with their rebuild? I think this is a good question to ask a prospect-centric analyst. Perhaps we will do that by the end of this week.
Maybe we'll even have someone on this week.
Might even have a perfect person to answer a question like that. This would be a tough group to identify a core group of 5 in right now because they haven't done much this offseason to help make the roster immediately better. They're definitely better in the long run, but you bring in
their top 5 projected hasn't played in the big leagues yet.
Yeah, that's kind of exciting. They're the guys they brought in: Mike Tauchman, Josh Rojas, Austin Slater, Brandon Drury, Michael Taylor, Matt Thaiss, like all guys that are just glue guys to sort of get them through the year. All guys that could get pushed off the roster. They could be cut. They could be traded.
They're hoping
they could be bench guys.
Yeah, they're actually hoping that one of those guys has trade value. That's all I can read into this.
Right. You're trying to get something back, a low A reliever or just future value. And in the meantime, some veteran leadership, right? That's the trade you're hoping to make. Okay, so Luis Robert in the 5. Andrew Vaughn, so long as he's on this team, is in the 5. Andrew Benintendi with that contract. And he had a good second half. We've talked about that. He's in the 5. 3 of his 5 spots are covered. And then there's a big dip in terms of projections.
Team, man. I am just, it's too depressing to run it. Who are you going to run out there at shortstop this year if you don't run him out there?
You could put Chase Meadroth out there, maybe. You could put Brooks Baldwin out there. Yeah. You play Brian Ramos at third base. you got a few options. But who plays? Okay, so out of that, beyond the Vaughn, Robert, Benintendi, like people understand what those guys do at this point of their respective careers. And
I think you just give Montgomery shortstop and just play him all year.
Play him all year and say, you know what, you're going to beat that 77 WRC plus projection. You had a better year in 23 than you did in 24, and we just want you to learn in the big leagues. I would agree with that decision. I think that's the right mindset to have.
They don't actually have a 5th guy in the rule of 5, and they're just hoping that Miguel Vargas plays into it or Chase Meadroth or Brooks Baldwin, that they're just hoping one of those guys plays their way into it because they don't have it right now.
Yeah.
I'm not playing Mike Tauchman every day. I'm not playing Josh Rojas every day. I'm not playing Brandon Drury every day. I'm not playing Austin Slater every day. Did Joey Gallo actually sign with them?
Yeah.
I guess he could play his way into the 5.
Come on, man. What? It's
bad,
brutal.
dude. That's my point. It's bad. It's bad, and I don't even know who to circle and say I'm excited about because I'm not excited about most of these people. Colson Montgomery, I like him. Colson Montgomery hit the ball 113.8 in the minor leagues last year, had a 34% hard hit rate. He had a little explosion in strikeout rate, which he'd never had before. If he can get back down to even a 24% strikeout rate with power and patience, it's not necessarily a type of player that we've seen a lot at shortstop. But it could be a slightly low average, but otherwise that's exciting.
It is pretty gross. I do think behind the plate, things could be better. Kyle Teel was a big part of the trade that sent Garrett Crochet to the Red Sox. We should see a lot of Edgar Caro and Kyle Teel behind the plate this year. Maybe even one of them spend some time DHing too, just so they can both be in the lineup together and both be on the big league roster without like sacrificing playing time. I think that'd be.
But teams don't give up assets like Corey Lee. Even if you don't think Corey Lee's that great, they don't normally give up assets like that. And so what are you doing with Corey Lee while all this is happening?
He's got a 66 WRC plus projection. With all due respect to Corey Lee, I think they can give up on Corey Lee or pass him through waivers and keep him at AAA.
He has one more option here, I guess.
Oh, good. They can just option him. They don't even have to go through waivers. Like, come on. Yeah. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Balancing the short-term grossness with the long-term potential is something that I think, White Sox fans are just going to have to do for a little while. I did see in our Discord, KB Dot wrote, I hate that I'm kind of getting excited to watch these kids play, but I'm excited to see Teal, Colson, Meadroth. I think Robert has a nice bounce back year. And hell, even Lennon Sosa is tearing up the Venezuelan league or something. Who knows? Maybe we only lose 99 games this year, which is amazing because PECTOA has them at 62 and 100 for their record. So that's sort of the question. Like, are they still a 100 loss team as they try and bring some of this young talent up to the big leagues over the course of 2025?
I'm not excited about any of the veterans they brought in, really. And I'm not even excited about the young guys. I'm not excited about Brooks Baldwin, really. I'm not really excited about Chase Meadroth. Colson Montgomery is the only guy I'm excited for, and he has some serious question marks about what the strikeout rate is actually going to look like.
I mean, can we even get you excited about pitching in this group? I know you like Sean Burke.
One guy. Yeah, Sean Burke. That's it. I like his fastball. Actually, Davis Martin, I think is interesting because he has that kick change. He has 2 pretty good breaking balls. And, if he kind of figures the touch around how to use all those pitches, I think he could break out a little bit. So those two pitches, Davis Martin and Sean Burke, have been on my rosters. You have to remember what's funny when you're searching for players in this group. It's a little bit like that when we saw the Rule of 5 projections, the bad teams had lower ones. When you're shopping on bad teams, you have to remember that the pitchers aren't going to give you wins. The relievers aren't going to give you that many saves. And the hitters may not give you all the plate appearances you think you're going to get because they're just going to spread it around and give everybody shots. So it makes it tough to, especially in 12 and 10 team leagues, you might just avoid the whole team altogether. Maybe Robert, and that's it. But in 15 team leagues, I think Davis Martin, Sean Burke are useful. And in the draft and hold, I actually did a Prelander Baroa Justin Anderson handcuff because it was so cheap. It was like my 48th and 49th round picks.
I'm going to agree with you, though, as far as this still being a year away from avoiding the dreaded 100 loss season. I think some of that speaks to the quality of at least 3 of the other teams in this division, possibly all 4 that we talked about in this episode being still good enough to pick on the weakness of the White Sox for one more year. I think they'll be a lot more watchable by August than they are in March and April. So you have that going for you, White Sox fans. And hey, maybe we should go to a White Sox game this year. I mean, it might just be a fun thing to do. Second half of the season when the weather's nice, not in April.
Or maybe even like a post deadline, see who they bring up, what kids they bring up.
Yeah,
who they traded away, what guys they released, who they bring up.
My optimism for this team will start to increase when Noah Schultz and Hagen Smith and those guys are deemed ready, because I think they're really exciting top-end pitching prospects that can help turn this around relatively quickly. I just don't know if we're going to see those guys any earlier than August. I kind of feel like they're going to wait it out a bit longer before they start pushing more of those guys into the mix. Let's get to a few sleeper selections from this division. Do you have a sleeper bat that you like from the AL Central?
I forgot to prepare this aspect. I'm going to go with Kyle Manzardo.
All right. You can stick with Kyle Manzardo.
Bet against Carlos Santana's 38-year-old knees. And also just a bet that team needs a slugger. It needs its Josh Naylor.
Yeah.
And I think that's the best guy to step into it is Kyle Manzardo.
I actually went Jonathan Rodriguez from the Guardians as a super deep sleeper. Not usually we're looking at like 12, 15 team leagues. I think Rodriguez has big time power. It's a bit like the John Kenzie Noel, like high hard hit rate, lots of swing and miss at AAA, but they're going to be looking in every corner they can to find some thump. I think they are going to miss Josh Naylor, even if Kyle Manzardo basically fills those shoes. They seem like they were still one really good power hitter, maybe 2 power hitters away from being a more dangerous lineup. And I think Jonathan Rodriguez could get them there. How about a sleeper starting pitcher? I'll go first to buy you a little extra time. I think Chris Bubic is pretty interesting because pre-injury in 2023, he was showing us a little bit more in terms of swing and miss sort of stuff. It's a lot more command than overall pitch quality. So I think that's part of it. But I think in that ballpark, especially, you mentioned it suppresses homers, but it doesn't suppress runs. It's still an overall good place to pitch. There are some soft landing spots in division. I like Chris Bubic trying to make the move back into the rotation this year. So he's going to be my starting pitcher sleeper from this group.
I'm going with Gavin Williams. The Guardians don't usually have a guy with a good fastball, and he throws pretty hard, and I think he can have a good fastball for them. Has 2 good breaking balls. I think a healthy year from Gavin Williams could be pretty exciting and relevant in every league, which is I'm not sure Chris Bubic will be. So that could be even a 10-team last starter or one of your last bench starters. Gavin Williams is appropriate in any league.
How about a sleeper reliever? I'm going to say Matt Manning. I think Matt Manning's days as a starter might be over, and I think it solves who's the best reliever in that group of Tigers relievers. I think one thing we saw with Matt Manning were a lot of fluctuations with his fastball velocity. If you put him into short relief, perhaps you keep the floor higher and you increase the ceiling at the same time, shorten up the arsenal a little bit. Matt Manning, 20 saves this year? Would that be the weirdest thing you've ever seen, or would it actually be pretty fun?
That is pretty fun. So I will avoid going up against you with Bo Brisky, and I already sort of said why I love him. I'm gonna go with Lucas Erceg. He has better stuff, better projection than Carlos Estevez, and the ninth inning does still have the highest leverage. People talk about, oh, well, do you need a fireman in the seventh or eighth? If you look at it, the ninth inning still has the highest leverage. So there is actually a reason why over the course of the history of baseball, we have used our best pitchers in the ninth inning. And I think generally that's what happens is that the better pitcher starts being used in the ninth. And I think Lucas Erceg is the better pitcher and will eventually take that job.
All right. So we're split on that one. I'm just taking the Carlos Estevez shares on the cheap and hoping he can just ride that wave all the way through the season again. I think he's a little underrated too because he spent so much of his career in Colorado. So that's probably in the back of my mind every time I think about Carlos Estevez. And then it's also the quotes from last spring when his pants didn't fit. Like no one's pants fit. The whole pants fiasco still 1 year away from being resolved too. Stephen Nesbitt wrote about that for The Athletic. The material for the jerseys has changed. Material for the pants, 1 more year. Gotta wait for that to catch up, I guess.
If I had to choose between which one I would like to see through,
I think I would have.
Yeah,
I think
use that material for the pants.
If it's the exact same material, I think they should have made the pants first. That would be my general advice. If you can only make one the appropriate thickness, make the pants.
There's that one guy from the Giants. There's a Casey Schmidt picture out there in the world.
No, it's
don't Google it.
Bad pants. Everybody, don't do it. Don't do it. We are going to go on our way out the door. A reminder: you can get a subscription to The Athletic at theathletic.com/rates and barrels. You can find Eno on Bluesky, enosaris.bsky.social. I'm dvr.bsky.social. Thanks to our producer Brian Smith for putting this episode together. We are back with you on Thursday.
Thanks for listening.